Look at him, eating whatever he wants, never gaining a pound, while I'm stuck with the boring special and can't lose an ounce.
How's your lunch, man?
Amazing. Yours?
So good.
Oh, I'm so happy for you.
Cool, buddy.
Weight loss isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. The affordable GLP-1 source that can fix your frustration with food.
So, same time next week?
No!
Definitely.
And your friends. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
At DSW, we ask the important questions, like, what shoes are you going to wear? Whether you're prepping for wedding season, festival season, or just planning the ultimate vacay, the right shoes can make or break an RSVP. So own the moment. You've got big plans, and we've got just the shoes. At the perfect price, of course. Get ready to get ready with Designer Shoe Warehouse. Head to your DSW store or dsw.com today and let us surprise you.
Voices for Justice is a podcast that uses adult language and discusses sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including violence, abuse, and murder. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. Today, I'm bringing you part 2 of my coverage of the murder of Noreen Boyle. In part 1, we discussed Noreen's case all the way through the conclusion of her murder trial. If you have not listened to part 1, go back and do that before listening to this one, or this episode will not make any sense. In this episode, you're going to hear directly from Collier Landry himself, Noreen's extremely brave child who not only testified against his father, Jack Boyle, during her murder trial, but found crucial evidence that ultimately led to his conviction. I've had the opportunity to get to know Collier over the last few months, and it's honestly just been amazing to see how he's turned his mother's tragedy into honoring her legacy through helping others. So, without any further introduction, this is my interview with Collier Landry.
My name is Collier Landry. I'm a filmmaker and podcaster based in Los Angeles, California. I am probably best known to the world as the creator and subject of a film called A Murder in Mansfield, which is about the murder of my mother by my father when I was 11 years old. I witnessed it happen. No one believed me except for one detective. And over the course of 25 days, myself and the detective solved the case, and they discovered my mother's body buried underneath my father's house in another state. It was the largest murder trial in Ohio history. It was a media circus and fiasco. I testified against my father at trial for 2 days at his months-long murder trial, and he is still incarcerated to this day.
Thank you for that. And of course, I did watch the documentary A Murder in Mansfield. And one of my first questions after watching that was, right in the beginning of this documentary, I see clips of people saying, your story is like something out of a movie. One person even called it better than a soap opera. How does that make you feel?
So that's an interesting question, actually. And I'll tell you sort of why. So I, as the witness, as the main witness against my father, I was never able to see any of the trial. And subsequently, after going through all of this, I never watched the trial. It wasn't until I was at my premiere in New York City, watching the film in the theater with the audience, that I saw not only myself on the witness stand, but these people's reaction. And the one woman saying, it's like a movie. It's like a soap opera happening in our town. I mean, the sound bites are crazy. And I realized, when they're panning in the doc of the people in the courtroom from the news clippings, or from the news stories, the people standing outside the courtroom around television monitors, what a circus it was. And I sort of recently came into this sort of realization, probably in the last, I would say, year, where I realized that I grew up like a child actor that grows up on television that people know. And all of that started to hit me once I made the film and I was traveling around the world. But then when I specifically go back to Ohio, and people reaching out that knew me as a kid, that knew this little boy and always wanted to know what happened to this little boy. And then they see what happened. He came back, he made a film, he has a podcast, whatever, right? He's a filmmaker. And, it's like, if it had been a couple of years after that, because I do remember going to the courthouse and seeing all these news trucks with the giant little towers on top of the news trucks and things, and the sort of circus that was outside. But I was obviously led into a back door. I was a minor, right? But the trial was televised. So my testimony happening in court was happening live on television for people to watch. So again, it's like that little kid growing up in front of the camera, literally. And when I look back at it now, I have a much different reaction to it as like, what would I do if I was a parent? What would I do if I was a guardian? What would I do in that situation? Because I don't think a camera would be allowed in a courtroom when a minor was testifying against their father for murdering their mother, let alone. But I also kind of look back on it with this, not disbelief, but this sort of, I had this very disjointed sense of reality, this real disconnection from the circus, because I was driven by one thing: justice for my mother. I wasn't blinded by anything else. I was aware of what was happening, but it didn't matter. It was, I'm going to find justice for my mother.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and it's such a brave thing to do. I have to ask you, what did it feel like to testify against your father and to see him sentenced? I mean, I obviously can tell you that I know it's a mixed bag of feelings, but I'd love to hear it from you.
I think that, well, look, I mean, to take the story back, on the morning of December 31st, 1989, when I woke up to the sound of those two loud thuds after hearing the scream, I knew when I confronted my father the next morning and I said, where is my mother? And he said, well, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier. As soon as he said that, I knew it's game on and this is a foot race and I'm going to win. Because he was like, don't call the police, we're not going to call the police. And what really weirded me out is he says, we're not going to call the FBI. And I'm thinking, okay, we're in a small town, Ohio. The FBI is not coming here. But I realized that, like, okay, this man is guilty. He has murdered my mother, or he has done something to her where she is, because my mother had never left me. And I was like, okay, this is now you versus me. This is good versus evil. So I think probably the hardest part for me is after they find my mother's body, because of the house that I find the photographs of in my father's truck with his mistress and all of that. That's eventually where they dig her body up. And they yanked me out of the house because my father was going to take me on a quote unquote, medical conference trip to Florida, which I would have drowned in the Gulf of Mexico, because I think at that time he realized I was talking to the police. And I think when everything really changed, so once they told me that she was dead, they found her body, I knew that he did it. I was already convinced that he had killed her, but then it was like the reassurance, right? So you're relieved in a sense because you found out the truth, but you're also so deeply saddened because, yeah, your father just murdered your mother. Your mother, who's your most important person in your life, is now, is now gone. And then now you have this sense of, okay, you're going to lose your father too. You have this moment of overwhelming sadness that, like, okay, my life is so, okay, she's dead. My life has changed forever, right? And that's a sad thing. But then to double down on that was the fact that my family abandoned me. So my father's side of the family wanted nothing to do with me because I had testified at the grand jury to secure his indictment. I was one who led investigators to see my father as a suspect. So they faulted me for his arrest and that I was putting my father in prison. My mother's side of the family, who had a genuine hatred of my father beforehand that I had no idea of, because he had molested my two cousins, who were girls, under the guise of giving them physicals. a couple of years previous. He was never charged in that case because the girls were so broken up about everything they couldn't testify. And I totally understand. But I knew nothing about this as an 11-year-old child. But that side of the family literally told me verbatim over the phone, we cannot take you in because you look like your father. Which is a horrible thing to hear as a child when you are grieving the loss of your mother and both of your godparents. You know, I grew up Catholic, so both of your godparents are supposed to take care of you, want nothing to do with you for something that you have no control over, mind you. So there was that overwhelming sense of sadness and abandonment that was happening at that time. So I was remanded to the foster care system. I was thrown in the foster care system. And I was sort of isolated until the trial in a lot of ways, other than going to school because I wasn't allowed to watch television because it was all over the news. I wasn't allowed to read the paper because it was all over the paper. And sort of had to keep my contact very limited to people outside of going to school because of influence over the trial and influence over my testimony, right? So when I go, you know, as I'm sitting there basically feeling alone, having lost the center of my world, which is my mother, and then no family support, and really just not a lot going on other than sitting there thinking about, okay, this is the moment. This is like the nadir of my life, right? Like, and I have a choice. There are two choices. First choice is if I don't testify against my father, and tell the truth and bring justice for my mother, I will, and my father gets off, I will, you know, he gets acquitted. I will probably go back to his custody, you know, and even if I do testify against him and he wins, you know, I'm going to go back to his custody, which he's going to torture me the rest of my life, guaranteed. Or if not, stick me in a hole somewhere as well. And if I do testify and he goes to prison, he is going, you know, my life is over as I know it anyways, because then I lose both parents and then I have no family and then I don't know what's happening to me. But at that same time, I'm like, this is the right thing to do. It's justice for my mother. And I was angry. And I had this, you know, there's a thing that people have told me before. They said, you know, people that go through extraordinary traumas and extraordinary circumstances have a fire that burns inside of them that is almost inextinguishable. And that was me. And as scared as I was of my father, because my father was a very violent person, and as horrific as what happened, and as scared as I was to testify, I walked into that courtroom with so much confidence, and I stared him down, and he refused to look at me for 2 days. And that is a really powerful thing when somebody doesn't have the courage to look you in the eye after doing what they've done. And you're going, yeah, I'm going to get you. Like, you're not going to get away with this. I mean, I think you understand that.
Yeah, of course I do. Of course I do. I mean, and you were so young at that time. I can't even imagine how hard it must have been for you. But, you know, to your point, it sounds like you were just doing the right thing. And I have to imagine, you know, that's something your mom taught you. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my mother raised me. It's weird. It's funny because, not to always take it back to the film, but that is why I've gotten into the work that I've done, was always to tell my stories. That's, you know, I said either it's two things. You know, I went to music school. So either I'm going to make it as a rock star and then share my story with the world and change people's lives, or I'm going to become a filmmaker, share my story with the world and change people's lives. Like, that was the two choices, right? And you know, that was the drive for me. But to take it back with the film is that, you know, I see the impact that something like that has now. And it made me like look back on my choices and say to myself, okay, if I didn't make that choice, where would I be right now? I'm 44. Where would I be if I could, would I be able to, I don't think I would ever be able to look myself in the mirror. I think, and it made me understand the impact of choices that we make in our lives by doing what I did and everything leading up to that moment, right? Of like, I'm going to go down swinging in life. I'm going to go down swinging in this situation because my father had a high-powered legal team, tons of money to do it. He was a doctor. And they, the odds were stacked against me in a lot of ways, even though I knew the truth. And I think my decision to do what I did is something that I will never have to regret, because I was true to myself, right? I think not a lot of people get that opportunity in life.
This episode of Voices for Justice is brought to you by Quince. I've been trying to be more intentional about what I wear each day. I'm leaning into pieces that feel effortless, comfortable, and still put together, and Quince has been my go-to. The fabrics feel elevated, the fits are flattering, and everything just works without overthinking it. They use premium materials like 100% European linen, organic cotton, and ultra-soft denim. And the best part? Everything is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for quality and craftsmanship, not brand markup. I recently just ordered their tiered linen dress, of course in black. I wanted to pair it with one of my favorite pairs of brown wedges. The problem was, I didn't have a brown purse. So I got that from Quince too. It's one of my favorite outfits. It's easy, effortless, and feels amazing, especially as we're getting a little bit warmer here in Phoenix. Refresh your everyday with luxury you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/justice for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/justice for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/justice. This episode of Voices for Justice is sponsored by Chewy. If you have pets, you probably know about Chewy, and you also know that when they say that they have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy, they're not messing around. To keep them happy, Chewy has over 100,000 products from all the brands my pets love at prices I love. To keep them healthy, Chewy offers pet prescriptions, pet insurance, telehealth vet visits, and they're even rolling out vet clinics across the country. I've been shopping with them for a very long time. And in addition to the auto-ship feature that gets the dog's food to them every single month, I also love to experiment with different treats. But I'm a bit picky. For me, it has to be high quality with simple ingredients. I recently picked up treats from Shepherd Boy Farms that are 100% just chicken breast. Popcorn and Heber are already obsessed. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. And right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. That's chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney to save $20 on your first order with free shipping. chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. I think that I know, at least in my experience, there's a huge amount of peace I feel that comes with doing the right thing. And for me, that peace never came until I actually did it. Just sitting there thinking about whether or not to do it or what I should do, that was the hard part. But once you get the hard thing over with and you just do it, in my experience, there's so much peace there.
100%. It's the action that leads you through the trauma. I did a TED talk about this. I said, it's like, we try to understand we try to comprehend as humans who are natural humans experiencing empathy, right? And we're trying to understand why these things happen in life. And, as natural empaths. And it really is until we stop saying why and we say, what now? Like, what leads us in the action? And it's ultimately what ends up leading us through this trauma. In my opinion and in my experience, is that once you make that decision, you flip that switch, that is ultimately what starts the path of whether it's justice for a mother, for a sister, for a friend, or it's justice, or it's your path to healing yourself after a traumatic event, or it's this it's the action that leads you past this, and it's the most difficult thing to do. But then you can go, okay, I did that. Now I can take on the world, or now I can do this. And there are many genesis of that in my life. That circumstance happening, the trial is just kind of where it all starts, right? And then there's the relationship that happens afterwards, the forgiveness with my father. Then there's the quest to make the film and tell the story, and then it just all continues on. I haven't taken my foot off the gas since I was 11 years old, and maybe that's a trauma response. maybe that's a little bit of that fight or flight. You did ask earlier about my mother, and one of the things, and how she prepared me. And what I was saying about the film is that when people watched it, they said, you understand why, how you need to understand how you were able to do what you did. I was like, what is it? They said, because your mother raised you a certain way that when trauma happens to children, they're dropped off a cliff, and how high they bounce back depends on how they're going to handle a situation. And you, by testifying, by being able to operate in the frontal cortex, right, and not your fight or flight, and you're thinking, you're using your limbic system. You're like, okay, I'm going to think my way through this. Okay, what am I going to do? Okay, he's leaving. I'm going to get this police officer's card. I'm going to say, my mother would never leave me. I'm going to call you tomorrow. I call him from school. I do this. I start telling him. I find the pictures of the house. I start searching for clues. Find the pictures of the house. Blah 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 blah. Right, all those things, and it was how my mother raised me that prepared me for that. Whether unbeknownst to her, obviously, but that it was the way that she treated me like a little adult. That because of the lack of having a partner a husband who was running around cheating on her, getting another girl pregnant, having multiple relationships with multiple women, and being an abuser of that, an abuser in his profession. She didn't have that support system. So I became her support system, and she was mine, obviously, as my mother. So it was that, and how she raised me and how she treated me like a little adult, like a little partner, that is what ultimately made me resilient enough and focused enough to deal with the circumstances in front of me.
I do want to ask you, what life looks like after he's sentenced. I know that you go into the foster care system. Eventually you are adopted. You find an amazing family. But what does that look like for you? I mean, my God, you were just a kid.
So the judge, who I actually recently spoke to for my podcast, but I remember, he called me into his chambers. This is after he sentenced my father. And I remember the day that he was sentenced because I was playing tennis, which is my favorite sport. And I was at the tennis club that they let me play at for free. And I remember everyone huddled around the tennis, because it was after I testified, so I could go out in the world and be like, okay, I'm going out in the world. Okay. Yay, what am I going to do? I'm going to go play tennis. And not against the garage door. And I remember everyone huddled around the monitor, and I remember him being sentenced. And then, they said the judge wants to talk to you. I took a phone call in the office or whatever. So I went down and talked to him, and he spoke to me about forgiveness. And he said, and at first I must have gotten this wrong, but he said, you have to learn to forgive, because you're never going to forget. Like, you're never going to forget that your father murdered your mother, and that this happened to you. But you have to find a way to forgive. And I really took that to heart, because I already knew that that's what my mother would want. And I wasn't bitter and angry. I was just sad. I was hurt. I was angry at what happened. I was angry at what he did. I was angry at him for that. But I was also sad, because not only did my life, did my mother's life get taken, did my life get destroyed, my family's life get destroyed, but his life got destroyed too. He had no reason to do what he did. And I thought to myself, I said, this is now the next phase of this, right? Is I need to come to terms with this before this takes hold of me for the rest of my life and destroys whatever life I can make. And that forgiveness, that path to forgiveness, was so crucial. And I was filming in the Dominican Republic like in 2010, which is the year that my father was up for parole for the first time. And I had actually taken the job because it started out in Ohio, and I needed to go back. I needed money to go back to see my father, because I wanted to get ahead of this parole thing. And I knew there was no chance he was getting paroled. I said, look, sure, I'll say I support your release, because I was ultimately looking for my father's cooperation in making a project. and I knew that he wasn't going to get out. But I also had that moment with him where I said, I just something snapped in my mind where after all these years, and I had a relationship with him in prison because, but our relationship was always very surface, always is. And, so it was like, you can't talk like, cause he's a sociopath, right? So it's like, oh, I'll talk about girls. I'll talk about, basketball. I love sports and things like that. Talk about academics, but not like, and then of course we have to talk about what he's doing and all the good things that he's doing in prison because it's all about him, right? And the relationship with the narcissist and the sociopath. It's not about anything you're going through, or his interest that he feigns is because he ultimately wants you to lead back to like what he's doing, right? So, but he did say to me he was responsible for her death. He didn't say that he doesn't say anything that he said in the film. He just said that he drove her to be whatever. And I was like, okay, thinking to myself, whatever, dude. But I realized in that moment, and this would be strengthened when you see the scene in the film, but I realized that I'm not him. And so I'm sitting in the Dominican Republic with these guys in a sweaty hotel room. And they said, how can you forgive somebody like that? Like, how can you like F that dude? Like, he's a piece of crap, like what would he, they weren't saying that obviously, but I know this program is PG. But they were saying, screw him. Like he deserves to be where he is. You don't ever have to talk to him again. And I said, hold on. I said, you are looking at this in a way that is very short-sighted. Forgiveness is not about him. It doesn't exonerate him. It doesn't acknowledge anything that he's done is valid. It doesn't acknowledge that anything he's saying to me is valid. It's about me. I don't care about him. I care about his feelings. I care about me. I don't want to be destroyed. I have to make this path to peace myself because I'm not going to get it from him. I'm not going to get, I'm not going to get it from the world. I'm not going to get it from my family. I'm not going to get my mother back. I'm not going to change the course of history or the course of the past, rather. I can only change the course of my history, right? And again, at that moment when I was 12, this moment I was like 32, explaining all this to people is like, look, this is, when this is where it all happens. Is literally you free yourself from those chains, that bondage of what happened to you. And that started like right after hearing, he was convicted, he's going to prison. It's like, okay, which I knew was going to happen, or I hoped was going to happen at least. And I knew that this was going to ultimately be the outcome. He would be incarcerated. But, it's like, okay, this starts with me. Like I have to make peace with this before it destroys me. Because honestly, in a lot of ways, people tell me, I'm an outlier. Like you should be underneath a bridge, shooting heroin, getting wrecked in, East LA, and nobody would blame you. And the fact that you're functional, living in a world, you're engaging, you're interested in life, you have this work you're doing is incredible. And I'm just like, well, it's just me. That's just who I am. That's who my mom raised. I don't look at it as anything special. I just go, that's just me. Like I wasn't going to let it take me down. It's not to say I don't get sad, but I'm not going to let it take me down.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
What they did to your family, you're lucky to make it out alive.
Streaming on Peacock.
These men are going to come after me. Taking them out is my only chance.
Put a bullet in her head.
From the co-creator of Ozark.
Looks like a family was running drugs.
Execution-style killing, it's rare for the Keys. Any leads on who they might have been running for?
The cartel killed my family. I'm gonna kill them. All of them.
MIA. Streaming now. Only on Peacock.
I feel that so much, obviously. And I know exactly where you're coming from. And I want to ask you, what made you compelled to make this documentary, A Murder in Mansfield? How does it go from being this just obviously horrific life experience that changed you forever and changed the course of your life forever to wanting to create this documentary and particularly being so involved in the documentary? How did all that come to be? Why did you choose to do it? And, how did it make you feel? I know that's a lot of questions, but I just want to know more about it.
Well, so there's a very interesting thing that happens when you make a documentary with a 2-time Oscar winner. And, Barbara Koppel is extremely well respected in Hollywood, and people would say to me, so what was it like to have Barbara Koppel want to make a documentary about you? I said, well, you're going to have to rephrase that question. You're going to have to flip the names. What was it like to want to have Barbara Koppel direct a documentary about you? Because what happened is that my response to all of this, I'm an artist, right? I grew up with a very artistic background. I was into music, into the arts, drawing, painting, whatever. My mother was very supportive of that. And that's how I coped. Like I said, I went to music school. I actually dropped out 2.5 years in, but I dropped out to move to Los Angeles because I wanted to tell this story. And I didn't know how that was going to be, whether it was going to be through film, whether it was going to be through a television series, whether it was going to be a scripted film and not a documentary. I didn't know. But all I know is that I needed to tell the story and that I needed to learn how to be able to do that. So that's why I became a filmmaker. And I think I had said earlier, it was there was two things. I was either going to become a rock star, become famous, tell my story and change the world, or become a filmmaker, tell my story and change the world. That was it, right? And I had many experiences that led me through it, but the first, where this really started, not only because growing up, I was very obsessed with the fact that people, and we as a society, look at violent crime in one way. We go, okay, the bad guy goes to prison, the victim is dead, the bad guy goes to prison, the state gets its restitution, the gavel hits, we say next. We never examine the consequences of violence. We never examine its impact on ancillary victims, on the communities that it takes place in, the ripple effect. And now that's become very fashionable, as you know, and for good reason, obviously. But back then, it wasn't. And I grew up with that. And I thought, I'm going to change this. I'm going to change this narrative any way that I can do that, right? And so I saw a film in a theater out in Northridge, California in 1999 called American History X. I walked out of that theater with my friend at the time, and we were just blown away. It's a fantastic piece of American cinema, by the way. Edward Norton, Beverly D'Angelo, Elliot Gould, Eddie Furlong. It's about a neo-Nazi who goes to prison and reforms his ways and blah, blah, blah. Directed by Tony Kaye, who's an absolute maniac, but a genius of a filmmaker. And produced by a gentleman named John Morrissey. And I remember walking out of that film and I said, whoever made that film understands the consequences of violence. I said to my buddy, BC, I want whoever did that film to help me tell my story. Flash forward 9 years later, I'm sitting in my little Hollywood bungalow. My girlfriend at the time comes in and she goes, hey, this guy contacted me on MySpace. He's shooting a coffee table book. He wants to photograph me, but he's also a movie producer. And I was like, oh, what movies has he done? And she starts rattling off all these movies, Booty Call, Havoc, Kingdom Come, blah, blah, blah. And then she gets to American History. And I said, American History X? And she said, yeah. I said, let's meet this guy. So I became friends with the movie's only producer, John Morrissey. And about 2 years after that, I had started getting into filmmaking, and I was learning the craft. I was learning lighting and working for free on big union sets just for food, and just so I could learn, going my version of film school, right? And I was learning how to shoot. And he had approached me about doing a project that I thought was really ridiculous. But I said, John, I don't want to do this project with you, but this is what I want to do with you. And I walked over to my shelf and I grabbed a blue binder, which is sitting right behind me right now. And it was filled with newspaper clippings that someone gave me when I was in my mid-20s. They gave it to my adopted parents. And it is all the newspaper articles from when like my mother went missing to like through the trial and then after the trial and then my father's appeals and all this stuff. It's all in this book. And I said, you did American History X. I want to do a film about the or a film, or actually at the time it was a docu-series that I wanted to do. I said, I want to do a docu-series about the consequences of violence. And I said, the best news is I own the rights to the pilot. Here's my life. Because one of the other reasons besides getting into the entertainment industry that I moved to Los Angeles is I also wanted to get away from everyone. I did not want my story to leave me in a room. I wanted to go where nobody knew who the hell I was. And there wasn't a narrative other than who I am. Oh, he's a great guy. Oh, he's a nice guy. Oh, he's a cute guy. Oh, he's a talented guy. Like I wanted to be known for those things, independent of what my story was. So little people knew about my story other than Collier is from Ohio. His dad killed his mom and he was adopted. Like that was like the story that pretty much everybody sort of knew, but they didn't really know any other details. And he reads the book and he calls me the next day and he shouts a few expletives. He's like, I like, this is your life? Are you kidding me? I said, no. And then he goes, I think I know somebody who would be interested in this. She's won 2 Academy Awards for documentaries. And I just did a film with her. Her name is Barbara Koppel. And that was the moment that all of it started. And that was like 2009. And then I slowly started piecing it all together from there. And, obviously one of the biggest things is getting into a prison to film. And that is obviously the really amazing sort of finale, if you will, of the documentary. But, I did things like where my father had been transferred to a prison called Marion Correctional Institution, which to its credit is the most progressive prison in North America, where most prisons have, a handful of programs outside of religious programs for inmates. This has about 70. In fact, Piper Kerman, who is Orange is the New Black is based on, she actually teaches writing to inmates there, or at least used to. So there was a guy there who was the head of the Ohio State Department for like the audiovisual, and he was the head of the department inside the prison that would produce content for the state of Ohio. So I would actually go and I met him. We became friends, Facebook friends, of course. And I would go into the prison and when I would come back to Ohio, and I would teach the other prisoner inmates things about how to edit films and filmmaking and commercials. I do web design and graphic design. I would teach them all these things. And I helped them get cameras for the studio and they had an audio recording thing. And I just helped them sort of streamline and just donated my time, because I wanted to shoot there. And it actually worked out not in our favor, all these things that I teed up. And of course, my father's enthusiasm because he was he thought that I was going to make a film to help him get out of prison. So it's all him as a narcissist and as a sociopath. So when putting all the film together, that was the big issue is, are we going to be able to film the prison? I was like, look, guys, I've teed this up. You guys need to call. And I've teed everything up. I've got permission from the warden. We need to solidify this with, production company. And then they waited too long. And then when they called, that was the day the warden had been promoted and they had a new warden come in who didn't know me. And they were like, well, no, you're not going to film the prison. And then we were kind of, stuck. And I said, I'm going to go back to Ohio and sort this out. So I had to back channel through the governor's office. I had to make friends with the former warden. I had to, I still would call it the best pitch meeting of my life to the head of the Department of Corrections who said no, on why this would be a really good piece for us to do. And they, I said, look, it's like the prodigal son returns to confront his father. And then they have a big come to Jesus moment and his father admits his guilt and all this. Now, what I didn't tell them is that I know my father's a sociopath and the likelihood that he's ever going to admit his guilt for anything is like, finding a needle in a haystack. I mean, you have better odds of winning the Powerball, So yeah, it all unfolds in this whole sort of, this whole scene in the end where we see that, and the other side of all this, like that's just like how it happened. But my drive for doing all of this, getting involved in the film business, making to tell this, telling the story is because at the fundamental core of everything, I wanted to know from my father, why did you do this? Why did you murder my mother? Because I had never gotten that answer from him. I wanted him to come clean, and I wanted to know why he did it. I wanted to understand why he caused all of this destruction. And that was my driving force. Not only because I wanted to tell my story, I wanted to set out to honor my mother's story, to tell her story, so her death wouldn't be in vain. I also wanted to speak to that kid who is me, foster care, 12 years old, abandoned by his entire family, literally staring at the nadir of his life, into the abyss, if you will, and saying, I was that kid. And guess what, man? You're going to make it. It's going to be okay. It's going to suck. You're going to come out with bumps and bruises, scrapes, maybe a couple sprains, but you're going to survive. And I'm living proof. So that was like this, again, this inextinguishable fire that is burning inside of me. And it motivated all my decisions and but also to get that resolution that I was sort of hell-bent that I always needed. Like, I want to really understand why. And then as you see in the film, that isn't. I don't get that, but I end up getting a much better answer. I end up getting a much better resolution to all of it that I didn't know was possible.
Yeah, I mean, that end scene hit me for a lot of reasons, obviously.
Sure.
Not to make it about me, but I did want to ask, like, are you satisfied with that answer?
So it's really funny because, again, and this is actually something that I was just discussing with Amanda Knox and Tara Newell. And it was like, and you're the same way too, is, Amanda had just had a baby recently. And she was talking about, like, how people say you don't know what it's like to be a parent until you're a parent. It's like, yes, it's the same thing with survivors. And I said, yeah, it's if you know, right? And survivors and people who have been through this sort of true crime life or these ordeals, these horrific events, like, you don't know. It's very easy to like sit back and judge, make comments, good or bad, right? Be disparaging, be supportive, whatever your sort of ilk is. But I think, for me, one of the things is that everybody's like, oh man, you didn't get your answer. This got to be so frustrating. I'm like, no. I did get my answer. And I was talking to the psychologist in the film, Dr. Dennis Maricus, after the film. And I said to him, what do you think would have happened if my father had just come clean and just said, this is why I did it. I did it because I was angry at her. I had an impregnated girlfriend and I just wanted to get rid of her and stick her underneath the floor of the basement. We came to the conclusion that I would have more questions. I wouldn't have the peace that I have because, as you see in the film, when I finally say to him, I believe that you believe that, and that's my answer, I mean it. I realized in that moment, cameras rolling, that hour in the prison, I realized at that very moment that even though half of that man's blood courses my veins, I am his son. We could not be further apart. I am nothing like him. And I don't have to worry about that. And I have my answer. I'll never get the why because there is no why. It doesn't matter. What matters is the here and now. That is my answer. So yeah, I was really satisfied with it because it was also like this amazing, I was sort of flabbergasted. Like, Collier, you did all this for that? Like all this, and then this is what it is. But it's like, everybody always says it's about the journey, not about the destination. It's so true. It's so true. Everything leading up to that, it was such an amazing feeling. Even though it freaked me out at the time, it was such an amazing feeling to like look back on that and have that moment of just like, wow, I did that. And I have way more than I ever could have imagined. It's like, it reminded me of like in Star Wars, when Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Darth Vader, if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you will ever imagine, or than you could ever possibly imagine, not to murder the movie for those who are fans. But, it's like that. And it's like an indescribable moment of what was going on and what it feels like to just, you're talking at that point, 26, 27 years of my life spent to get to that moment. It's a long time.
I do understand. I understand how it was satisfying because you know your father in a sick, twisted way, of course, but you know him. And when he gives you answers like that, I mean, at least in my opinion, when my father would try to manipulate me and gaslight me and give me answers that I felt were a semblance of the truth as opposed to the full truth, I felt like I could see right through him. And I did feel like I got my answers despite him not stating them explicitly. So I totally get it. Let's get into what you're up to now. You mentioned your podcast, Moving Past Murder. I know that you just interviewed the judge in your mother's case. So what's going on with the podcast? What's going on with that interview?
So I reconnected with him when I just went back to Ohio last week. And so that interview is going to be coming up the next couple of weeks. My podcast essentially starts out with my journey into what happened to me as a child. And then I interview people from the case. I do talk about other true crime cases under my sort of initially in the first few episodes about relating it back to my experience, like how I handle it, how I would relate to this, what this reminds me of. But now I get into more of I'm reading the letters. I'm interviewing people like yourself. You're going to be on the podcast. I'm interviewing, Tara Newell, and we've actually started another podcast called Survivor Squad, where survivors are telling their stories. And but I talk to people who work in true crime, and I talk about people's obsession of true crime. And then I share my own personal stories. And like I said, I get to, I've interviewed the judge from the case, and he even told me stuff that I didn't even know because I haven't ever watched the trial, and things that I learned about my father. Like my father had a person that was procuring girlfriends for him while he was a doctor and lining up these people, and how much, some of the stuff. And then, in some of my episodes, I discovered like a tape recording of my father had done 5 years after he was incarcerated, like after he'd been incarcerated, almost to the day of my mother's murder. And he gave this interview on this very right-wing sort of borderline, I don't know if QAnon was around back then, but like this very like far-right religious talk show. And I actually played the tape and listened to him spout all these conspiracy theories because he was trying to play onto their current conspiracy theories to gain traction for an appeal. And then I interviewed them about it because I contacted them and reached out and said, hey, I have this thing. Would you talk to me? Because I saw that they have another radio show. So my producer reached out to them and said, hey, would you talk to him? And so I interviewed them, this team that met my father and spoke to him and gave him airtime for his crazy wackadoo conspiracy theories. Like my mother was involved in a baby selling ring and Chinese gold smuggling. And, it's people grab at straws when they're guilty. That's for sure. You can never underestimate the predictability of stupidity. or people who have a fundamental lack of integrity.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, the narcissist is incapable of admitting their faults, in my experience. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even close to it, but that's just my experience.
But we have real world experience that doctors don't get, sadly.
Well, an entire childhood with a narcissist, yeah, I'd argue is pretty decent experience.
Exactly, precisely.
Yeah.
And it's but yeah, so I have the podcast Moving Past Murder. I have the film that I made, A Murder in Mansfield, but really the podcast is the next genesis of that, to share more of my story, to talk to others who are doing good work, and to talk about the human element of true crime. But it's also about like trauma recovery and my story. And I'm getting more into that, more wellness and how you can heal yourself and things that I do that are part of my routine. One of my favorite episodes I do is with an author. His name is Dr. Angel Iskovich. He wrote a book called The Art of Routine. I talk about like how routine is so important for trauma survivors, because as someone who's, who has had to deal with fight or flight, or is always in this sort of state of hyper awareness, like being in a routine keeps you focused and keeps you out of that, because it's exhausting to live like that. So I talk about trauma recovery a lot too, because it's my personal journey, and I'm just evolving as a podcaster. I've only done 53 episodes now, or 52 episodes, so I'm just evolving and finding that voice, but it's all a continuation of spreading my mission of just, you can make it through these unspeakable circumstances and come out the other side pretty much okay. And to honor my mother and her legacy, and just to move forward, sharing empowering stories with my audience.
I love that. And of course, I'm always here to support you in any way I can. I know
You're
that.
amazing.
Well, getting into podcasting is scary, you know what I mean? And yeah, you're right. 50 episodes or so is like still relatively new, even though it feels like a lifetime of work. I feel like I've been podcasting for approximately 35 years. And it's been 3. So I totally get that. But before we head out of this interview, I, of course, want to ask, where can people find you? Where can they find both of your podcasts? How can we best support you?
So all of my social media is at Collier Landry. So you can find me on TikTok at Collier Landry, Instagram at Collier Landry. My website, collierlandry.com, has my podcast, my YouTube channel. My podcast is called Moving Past Murder. You can find it on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, wherever you find your podcasts. And all my socials, again, Collier Landry. My other podcast I've started with Tara Newell is called Survivor Squad. We are going to probably release our first episode within the next month. So maybe by the time this episode comes out, it'll be almost out. And Moving Past Murder, Survivor Squad, collierlandry.com. And that's where you can find me. And TikTok, of course, the good old, TikTok very well.
What's a TikTok? Yeah.
What's a TikTok?
I'll have all that linked below too, so that you guys won't have to try to dig for it. But yeah, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm very excited to interview for you. I love that we're doing this swap, and I just love that we met each other and that we know each other, because I mean, my gosh, no two crimes are alike, but what you and I have gone through, what you went through and what I'm about to go through are so similar that I'm just truly grateful to have you in my life. And I'm sure I'll be asking you all sorts of questions about trial stuff pretty soon.
Well, and also, that is right there at podcasts and everything. That's great. The human connection of just meeting someone else who has been there and walked through the fire, like that's the real value. And like, absolutely 100% here for you on that, Sarah. Absolutely.
Oh, well, thank you. We'll end on that nice gushy note. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Voices for Justice is hosted and produced by me, Sarah Turney, and is a Voices for Justice Media original. If you love what we do here, please don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show in your podcast player. It's an easy and free way to help us and help more people find these cases in need of justice. And for even more content, check out my other podcast, Disappearances, only on Spotify.